Join us now in today's Austin Faith Dialogue.
A modern-day prophet spoke these words to our society in 1968. The world is changing, and anyone who thinks he can live alone is sleeping through a revolution. We must learn to live together as brothers, or we'll perish together as fools. Racial injustice is still the black man's burden and the white man's shame. The government must share the guilt, the individual must share the guilt, and even the church must share the guilt. Hello, and welcome to Austin Faith Dialogue. I'm Carl Gronberg, your host for this program. Today we are discussing racism. My guests are Kwesi Evans, publisher of NACOA and founder of the African American Improvement Corporation. Beulah Cooper, an educator from the Austin Independent School District, having concluded her career as a counselor at Lyndon Baines Johnson High School. And Kirk Bowles, sports writer for Austin American Statesman. And I want to say to the three of you, thanks very much for being with us on Austin Faith Dialogue. I'd like to start by asking the logical question, it seems to me. Kwesi, how do you define racism?
Well, Pastor, I define racism primarily, if I can, in a word, as insecurity. Those people who practice racism feel insecure in their own position and consequently have to put someone else below them. And we, as a society that pretends to be homogeneous, are very guilty of practicing racism in order to feel more secure in our own home, in our own community, in our own city, in our own environment. And we do plague others with problems that we do not want visited upon ourselves.
Kwesi, are you saying then that racism is a tool of holding people down?
It is a tool not only of holding people down, but of dividing people who do the same type thing. One worker who is black and one worker who is white, who's given a different salary, is divided from the other because of that salary difference and because of that perceived difference in color.
Kwesi, is racism, in your opinion, is it unique to our culture and our society?
I think that racism is prevalent in every society, but it is unique in the way that it is practiced in our society. I think that American racism is the most devastating form of racism that has ever been practiced on earth, and I think that racism as it's practiced in America is the worst crime in history.
If I were watching this on television right now, Kwesi, you know what I'd say to you? What gives you the right? What kind of credentials do you have? Where do you come from, sir? And tell us a little bit about your background, your educational background. Where were you educated?
Well, if I can begin with what gives me the right, and then I'll give you my background.
Right.
What gives me the right is that I am an American citizen who believes in rights and justice and equality. I'm also a God-fearing man who loves the Creator, and because I believe in God, I believe that right should overcome wrong, and racism is wrong. I grew up in Kentucky, in a real small town called Paris, outside of Lexington, where the University of Kentucky is. I was educated at the University of Kentucky, and after receiving my bachelor's degree, I immediately moved to Austin. I had visited Austin in 1975 and fell totally in love with the place. I knew that if I was ever going to settle anywhere, this is where I wanted to be, and I've been here ever since, except for 2 years of graduate school in Houston at Texas Southern University.
Well, we're glad you're in Austin, Kwesi, and we're going to come back and talk some more, and thank you. Beulah, you define, would you please, from your experience, racism?
I think my definition would probably be much like Kwesi's. That is that it's a way of establishing a pecking order. There's someone who wants someone to be a little bit lower than they are, and that again comes from insecurity.
We want to pursue that with you in terms of education so that you might be able to help us to understand how racism and that pecking order that you talk about, how that's manifested in the areas such as the institution of education. And as Dr. King said in that lead that I had on the program, all of the institutions, the government, education, the church that I represent, all bear responsibility, along with the individuals of our society, to deal with this issue of racism. And racism is not dead. Racism is a part of our society now, and maybe some would say we've come a long way. But how much more is there to do? And let's pursue that and talk about that. Kirk, what about for you in the area of sports? How do you define racism?
Well, I would agree with what Kwesi was saying about insecurity. It's also about control. And the white man has always controlled sports in this country and has not relinquished his white man's hold on sports. You don't have to look too far to see racism in sports, unfortunately. It can be something as overt as not hiring black head football coaches in the National Football League. Football is playing for decades, and we still have yet to see our first black head football coach, and that's a travesty when you consider how much blacks have contributed to that game and what percentage the blacks participate on that level. I think it's making a mockery of the game, the fact that we have not seen a black head coach.
I think a phenomenon, Kirk, in our society is the place that sports holds in my life and in the life of many of us who are a part of this culture. And so you would even say that the institution of sports, if we might call it that, also has a responsibility to deal with the question and the reality of racism. Is that correct?
Oh, sure. I think it creeps into every fabric of our society, not just sports, but, you know, government, politics, religion, sex, everything we come in contact with every day.
I think that's something, a theme we want to repeat over and over again in this program. And I think we need to say it now, and then as we go through the program, racism is not a black problem. It's not a white problem. It's not a brown problem. Racism is a societal problem that we want to deal with. Is that correct? And we want to deal with it in a healthy way, and we want to deal with it in terms of helping people to grow through that. Beulah, when we talked in your home and also before we came on the set here, we talked about the history. How are some experiences of racism? How has it manifested itself in your life? Tell us a story or two.
Well, I guess I would go back to when I was in elementary school. All the books that I had represented the white society. And we learned all about the white people and what they did and what they contributed, but we learned very little about what black people contributed. I attended a school that was called Philly Sweetley in Muskogee, Oklahoma. I didn't know who Philly Sweetley was until I was an adult. And many of the other black people who contributed to this country, I learned about as an adult. On my own. I went to the library and read. One of the things, too, that I discovered when I started teaching in the 60s, I found a lot of resistance to learning with my first graders. And I was puzzled about it for a while, and then I looked again at the first grade readers, and you read about Dick and Jane and Spot and all of those, and Mama stays at home and Daddy goes to work, and those black kids saw no black children in there, and that wasn't the way their house was.
Beulah, you were teaching first grade in a black
school.
Elementary school?
Right.
In what city? Where were you located in?
Here
were you
in Austin? Yes.
And the reader that you had was the reader that did not hold up any type of models of black children?
No models at all. And I can remember when I was a child, the first book that I had with a picture of a black child in it was the story of Little Black Sambo. And there are people who are wanting to get that out. But that was the first child that I could actually identify with. Everybody else, they were just, you know, white faces with blonde hair. I wasn't white, and I didn't have blonde hair. But I knew Black Sambo, and I knew being hungry, and he's eating all those pancakes. I understood that.
Interesting. Well, we want to pursue the education. Let's come back to Kwesi. What's happening now? You've been in Austin since 1970? 78. What do you see happening in the city of Austin? How do you see things changing in the area of dealing with the issue of racism in our community? And what are some problems we have from your point of view as a newspaper person and a publisher of a newspaper, but also what are some of the improvements that are being made?
I wish I could highlight all the great and glorious improvements that we've made. I really think that we've lost ground. I've been here for nearly 11 years now, and the climate in Austin was much better when I first arrived than it is now. Racism is more pervasive now and more devastating. With Austin being the seat of government, the seat of state government, with the university being here, one of the greatest universities in America, and all that intellectual power being used for racist means, we have changed from what is perceived as the most progressive city in Austin to really a reactionary city with a progressive veneer.
Why is that, Kwesi? Why has that taken place? 11 years we moved backwards. Why do you think?
In 11 years we had Ronald Reagan, we had a crisis with the oil industry, and we had a deterioration in our economy. Whenever there's a deterioration in the economy, racism raises its ugly head even higher. When things get fewer, that is resources, then we always start from the bottom cutting. And most of the African Americans in this city are at the lowest echelon of the economic ladder because they've been denied opportunities to climb, denied opportunities to have decent jobs and to apply their talents and skills to the best of their ability. They have been left out. I get calls every day, literally every day, about people being harassed and discriminated against on the job, many of them from the city of Austin itself. These are people who are being, well, Dick Gregory was at Southwest Texas State last week, and he talked about the main problem with black people dying from stress, heart attacks, cancer. It's mainly because they have all this bottled up inside. When they are confronted with racism, and they're forced to hold that in, when they see racism smack them in the face, they can't rebel against it and say, this is wrong, I'm not going to take this. They have to keep their job.
Okay, if this scenario is right on, if this is the way it is and we have gone back, what can you, as a person who's a leading citizen in our community, someone who cares about this community, loves Austin, what can we do? What are some of the things that can be done to improve the climate and the condition?
I think as a person who wants to be a servant, not a leading citizen, but a person who really cares about all people, I think that we really need to be honest. We live a lie. Every one of us lives a lie. We pretend that Kurt is white and I'm black. And you have on black and white, I see there, and neither one of those colors resemble either Kurt or I. That's a lie. But we perpetuate that. And when you open your dictionary, you see that black is bad and white is good and Kurt's good and I'm bad. We need to face reality, live the truth, and we can make our society better. But we have to deal with reality and deal with truth.
When you spoke at Houston-Tillotson on Martin Luther King Sunday, when we went from the state capitol and marched over there, walked over there, what a delightful, beautiful Sunday that was, and going to Houston-Tillotson and the room was filled and the singing was marvelous, and you spoke. You highlighted 3 ways to face racism, and one of the ways you said was truth, dealing with truth, and that's what. But you had a couple other points that you made at on that talk. Do you recall what they were?
Yes, I did. Truth is the main thing. We have to face ourselves. We have to look into the mirror and see ourselves for what we are and make ourselves better. We hide from ourselves. We also have to build something. People who are victimized by racism are often concerned about tearing something down. Let's tear down the barriers of racism. Let's tear this. We don't need to tear down. We need to build up. We need to be constructive rather than destructive. Racism is destructive. We need to be constructive. We need to find harmony rather than disharmony. We need to look at ourselves objectively and honestly and say, I am a human being who has problems. I can be insecure, but you are not the cause of my problem. If there is a cause of my problem, I want to address it directly. I just saw this movie, Mississippi Burning.
Oh, you've seen that. Interesting.
I saw it this past weekend, and I was flabbergasted.
Were you furious? Were you upset about it?
No. Well, I've worked in every southern state with the National Alliance Against Racism and Political Repression, and I've been personally in direct confrontation with the KKK. I've had several conversations with the Klan, and I know that this was reality, so I was glad to see it put on the screen. But as Dick Gregory pointed out again at Southwest Texas State, how can a people who profess so strongly to believe in God keep committing these ungodly acts? How can we have racism and sexism and pretend that we are in tune with some God? If I'm in tune with God, how can I live a life that allows me to deny you your humanity?
Okay, we're dealing with what we call Austin Faith Dialogue Program, Equazi. And that means that we are approaching this community in which we live with the message you just said. There needs to be some sort of truth, and the truth is we need to recognize who we are. And that's not easy. That's a difficult process, I think, for everybody, but I think we're called to that by our Creator, by our God, to recognize who we are. Beulah, I think Equazi has touched on a couple things that we need to pursue even further, but particularly in the area of education. I know one of the big areas of education is how do we get more minorities to build up, as Equazi has told us. I think we build up through education. How do we get more minorities into education? That's a concern of a lot of colleges, and particularly the university system in the state of Texas.
One of the things I think would be to establish an atmosphere. You go where you feel welcome, you go where you feel wanted, you go where you feel secure. And if you go, many black people who go, say, to a campus like the University of Texas, they're absolutely overwhelmed by what they see there. They see so few minority people there. Another thing, I think, maybe the mindset. There are probably some people who feel that they just can't cut it. You know, the university is a big institution, and maybe I can't make it over there. So there are a lot of people who are very capable who could do it, but I think they need to talk to someone who's been there, possibly. Maybe get a buddy system of some minority person who's been there and share with them what kinds of things that they did while they were
Buddy
there.
system, linking people up.
Linking people up.
Yeah, letting them experience someone who has been on the campus, whatever the campus that may
Right,
be, and
right.
linking them up and saying, this is what I've experienced, and I
Yes.
think that you could experience possibly the same kind of building up, the same
Right.
type of growth.
It could be patterned after a program that the Ex-Students Association has. What they do is they get in contact with professional people, and then they find people on campus who are wanting to go into that profession, and they ask this professional person, would you be willing to spend a day with that person? And they come, and I have had several people come to my house who want to be counselors, and they talk to me about the kinds of things that they need to do. And I think if you got minority people who have been successful on campus, or even those who have not been successful, just to share their experiences, I think probably you would increase the enrollment of minorities on the campus.
Another thing you mentioned to me before we went on the air was encouraging high school counselors to become more aggressive in encouraging minorities. Isn't that
Right.
true? You
Right.
were a counselor at LBJ High School here in Austin.
Right.
What can a counselor do to help minority students to believe in themselves, that they can do the academic work?
Well, one of the things is just flat talk to them and talk to them about the kinds of things that they are doing in school at the time. I can recall several students that I talked to about the university and the kinds of things that they needed to do to get there. And I've had several students who called me back and thanked me for what I told them. There was an odd situation that occurred. This was a white student that I was working with, and she was going to Southwest Texas, she said, because she didn't think she could make it at the university. Well, we talked a while, and I encouraged her to go, and she did go, and she met her future husband there. They told me I was a matchmaker. But a lot of it, I think, is just a matter that that's such a big institution, and, you know, I just don't think I can make it over there, and they need to be told that
Kind
they
of
can.
overwhelming type thing.
It is.
What about the role of family, parents? You know, you mentioned about the books that you saw when you were a student and what you even used when you were teaching. What are the images that parents give to their children regarding other people, other races?
That's very important, too. The parents need to try to foster a positive self-image with their children. They also need to know what's going on in the schools with their children, because many times, let's face it, here in the Austin Independent School District, we do still have some racial prejudice going on, and sometimes the black students get negative messages. And I think parents need to be on top of that. They need to know what kind of messages that they're getting.
What messages they're sending to their children and what message the children are receiving.
Right. I'll give an example. I had a student who, when he came into the school where I was working, he had a pretty high test score, and he was doing fairly well. And I observed then that his test scores were sliding. They were really sliding. And I went into the classroom to observe, see what was going on. And each time I'd go in, he'd be asleep. I called him in and asked him what was going on. He said, well, she said when I do my work, I can go to sleep. I said, but what kind of work are you doing? Well, she was giving him Mickey Mouse work because the coach had said, don't give him an F, you got to keep his grades up. And this was what was happening. The coach was telling the teacher, give him Mickey Mouse work, he would do 2 or 3 problems and go to sleep.
Kirk, I don't want you to reveal any sources, you understand, but is that a reality that you can speak to? Is coaches are under a great deal of pressure on all levels? I would imagine even starts junior high.
Well, I think it's all too true, exactly what she hit upon. The need, the desire to win, the all-pervasive need to be number one in this country. It gets out of kilter, our priorities, our values, and we make decisions based on the wrong input too frequently. We're seeing a lot of lip service paid to academics and helping minorities now, and unfortunately some of the legislation seems to be more racist in its basis and in the result that it may have.
If that's true, Kirk, and where would you get that kind of feeling, that sense? How do you believe that it might be, even the legislation, more racist?
How we change it, or
well, where does that kind of idea come from?
Well, part of it is that, you know, they want to make academics strong. In the NCAA, they recently passed legislation that refused scholarship aid for any high school senior who has not made a certain score on his college entrance exam. And I think almost all surveys and studies have shown that those entrance exams are culturally and racially biased.
John Thompson, is that his name, at
Right.
Georgetown?
Right, walked
his
out.
protest, he walked out, and it was because of that issue, isn't that correct?
And it's gotten a lot of attention, focused on that program.
Exactly.
You know, a lot of people don't agree with John Thompson's method, but if at least focused attention on what most people are perceived to be a problem, you know, I would applaud him for that.
Well, Beulah, you had mentioned also that one way to help to get minorities into a college, university, is financial aid.
Yes.
And athletics has been a means so that minorities can find themselves on a college campus, correct?
Right. They need scholarship or whatever other kind of financial aid because many of the minority students just can't make it if they don't have that.
Because we're dealing, Beulah, also with economics then, and the reality that Akwesi was talking about is that we have to have some sort of strong economic base if people are going to be able to send their children to college.
That's true.
Akwesi, what about economics in Austin and what's happening? Let's just talk about east of I-35, economics there. What about the development of that part of our city? Do you, as a publisher of NACOA, and by the way, I like to show this because I think people need to know about NACOA. This is the newspaper that is published by Akwesi Evans, and it's one that, Akwesi, tell us a little bit about the newspaper, all right?
NACOA is the Progressive Weekly of Austin. We serve the peace activist community primarily. You'll see the story on Martin Luther King, and the back to square one is the Street People's Advisory Council. We work with the homeless. We work with all peace groups that we can get in contact with. We want to serve the progressive community. It was created by the African American Improvement Corporation to be that vehicle, the voice of the peace progressive community of Austin.
If people want to get copies of NACOA, how do they go about getting copies of this?
We have 75 locations all around the city. They can go to schools, hospitals, some churches. They can call our office. We're down at 3rd and Congress at 227
Say it
Congress
again.
Avenue.
Where are you?
We're at 227 Congress Avenue,
Thank you.
around the southeast corner of 3rd and Congress.
All right.
Our phone numbers are 473-2216 and 473-2217. We'll tell you where you can get a copy nearby. I will bring one to you. We want people to read NACOA. We want to use NACOA as a vehicle to combat some of the problems. And we've gone out on limbs in the past to bring problems to the fore that people weren't aware of and try to address them when they have the issue at Brackenridge Hospital with an employee who was discriminating some derogatory literature about Reverend Jesse Jackson. We were instrumental in talking with the administration over there and having that squelched.
What's going to happen in East Austin from your point of view? How will it be developed? What kind of economic things can happen over there?
Well, there's development going on now, especially in the 11th, 12th Street corridor. There's major development. The city has low-income loans for people who want to develop there, and there's action that will be taking place this week and in the very near future. I do feel, however, that the African-American community in particular is not going to benefit generally from this. There are people who do not live in East Austin, who have no concern about East Austin, who will benefit primarily. There's speculators who bought land over there, who bought up half the 11th Street corridor already, who have plans for shopping centers and supermarkets that we won't benefit from.
Crazy, that's the name of the game, though, in our society, isn't it? And how are you going to work? How is that going to work itself out? Will the black community be benefited by that, or are they just going to miss out completely?
The black community is going to not miss out completely. They will get the crumbs, like they always get their crumbs. They won't get a slice of bread. Okay. Let me say something that's really been gnawing at my brain for the last 5-6 minutes as you and Kurt and Ms. Cooper have been talking about minorities. I really take offense at that. That's a symptom of racism. When you label an African American or a Mexican American or a woman, especially a woman, because they're 52% of the population, a minority, you've said you are inferior. Let's give you a 10% minority set aside and we'll keep 90%. African Americans are not a minority. We're the second largest ethnic group in the country. You assume when you talk about a minority that so-called whites, who are not white, are a monolith. And that Jewish people and Italian people and Polish people and Hungarian
German people and Swedish people
are all one and the same. They're not. In fact, when they were in Sweden, they were Swedish. When they were in Germany, they were German. When they were in Hungary, they were Hungarian. But when they came to America, they became white. And we need to address the problem. Our biggest problem in America is whiteness. We need to eliminate whiteness. We need to have people who want to be white to just resign from the white race and rejoin the human race.
Thank you, Kwesi. I like that. Where's hope? We want to have hope. Where do you see hope in all of this?
I see hope in faith. I see hope. I believe that there is a God. I believe that people who profess to be white, although they are not, believe there is a God. People who profess to be black, although they're not, believe there is a God. And if we really do get in tune with our Creator and not with our own egos, we can find God, and we can find solutions to all our problems.
Our egos and our insecurities.
Yes.
Where, Beulah, on the way over here, I asked you, do you ever give up? And you said, no, you have hope. Where do you have hope? Where do you see hope?
As Akwesa said, in God. God's in his heaven and all has got to be right with this world one of these days. I don't know when, but one of these days.
Hope also in people like you, and Akwesi and Kirk. Kirk, how about you? Where do you see hope in the sports world?
Well, I'd like to see hope for a lot of, and I won't use the word minorities anymore. You've educated me on that.
That's right.
As far as young blacks, as far as some of the role models we have in sports, I think we're seeing more positive role models. You know, we see a lot of attention on drug cases, litigation in court, and that sort of thing. And I think we're seeing more positive role models, Walter Payton, Michael Jordan, people that are going out in the community, David Winfield, helping the underprivileged. And I see hope in those people.
We have really enjoyed having the three of you here, and you have educated us. And those who are watching this are going to be educated by what you've said, because we are indeed one people, and we need to hold that model, that view up in front of all. I started the program by sharing with you the words of a modern-day prophet, and he spoke some other words, words of hope that I'd like to share with you. One day he said, I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the meaning of its creed, that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. As people of this Austin community, this nation, as people of faith, we recommit ourselves and our institutions to living out that dream until that dream becomes a reality. Thanks to you, my guests, and thanks to you, our viewing audience. And be with us again next Sunday for Austin Faith Dialogue.
For more information about today's topic, call the Austin Area Conference of Churches